Locating ice cream in 17th century London. Elizabeth Howar's 17th century manuscript recipe book includes a rare and delicious recipe for ice cream flavored with rosewater and sweetened with sugar. The inner cover of this book bears her name, the date 1687, and two addresses in Spitalfields and Shoreditch that link Howar's recipe book to thriving mercantile communities in London's East End in the aftermath of the Restoration and the Great Fire. In this paper, I will analyze Howar's recipe within the local context of London and its near suburbs, and the colonial and imperial systems that brought ingredients like sugar to Howar's doorstep. I first saw Howar's recipe book at UCLA's William Andrews Clark Memorial Library in Los Angeles in 2018, and was immediately intrigued because, as I will discuss in a minute, it is truly exceptional to be able to link a recipe manuscript to a specific person, date, and rarest of all, place or set of addresses. I spent a good deal of time with the manuscript when I had a residential fellowship at the Clark in June of 2019. And that's when I updated Howar's ice cream recipe for a public event, drawing on my recipe recreation practices that I've developed for my public-facing Cooking in the Archives project. But when I proposed this paper in the fall of 2020, I was hopeful that I would be traveling to the UK to deliver it. And I was also hoping for a long overdue UK research trip where I would be able to conduct more research on the addresses in Howar's book, as well as her family history in the National Archives. I had a lot of items I wanted to see. And I was also hoping to see Anne Fanshawe and Grace Carteret, first Countess of Granville's recipe manuscripts at the Wellcome Library, as these two receipt books also contain rare 17th century ice cream recipes. Thankfully, the Clark and Wellcome have digitized these three manuscripts, so I have had virtual access. Nevertheless, these material conditions, as well as a lack of easy access to even any library books, have shaped the findings that I will share today, and will hopefully give us lots of places where we can think about future research directions in the Q&A. So I'll begin by discussing early modern recipe books in general as sources for food history research. And then I will turn to the ice cream and consider the ingredients and technologies: sugar, rosewater, cream, cloth, metal tins sealed with butter, ice, bay salt, and roach alum that Howar and members of her household might have used to prepare this recipe, as well as my own experience updating the recipe. Since ices and ice creams were associated with the most elite households due to their fleeting existence in a world without a temperature-controlled supply chain, this recipe speaks to how urban or mercantile households aspired to consume luxuries and eat delicacies that relied on the cold chain and on imports. I will then contextualize Howar's recipe by discussing two other late 17th century British ice cream recipes from Fanshawe and Granville's manuscripts. In the end, I hope to locate Howar's manuscript in general and the recipe for ice cream in particular within the spatial contexts of London's East End, as well as colonial and imperial trade routes. So part one, recipe books. Recipe book is a term that encompasses a wide variety of manuscript books containing medicinal and culinary recipes that were produced and used in England, Europe, and America between the 16th and the 19th centuries. Catalog descriptions also use the terms manuscript cookbooks and receipt books for these items. Some recipe books arrive in libraries as part of family archives. Christian Barclay might be surprised that her recipe book is in a box with letters and records about land ownership in Penn State's Eberly Family Special Collections Library, while other manuscripts were specifically acquired by libraries as recipe books or cookbooks. They come in all shapes and sizes: large, small, oblong. Some are small enough that they fit in my hand, and some, like this one, are even bound in limp parchment soft covers. Some of them are large folios with pages about the size of a piece of printer paper that require a stand to use easily. But many more are around the size of a trade hardback or paperback book. I've seen some that are completely full and some that were abandoned after a promising start. This is an opening of Elizabeth Howar's manuscript, the manuscript I'm focused on today. She inverted her manuscript halfway through and started again, and this is where the sections meet. And this is one reason why it's particularly annoying to use the digital images to deal with this particular manuscript, because you have to flip them around a lot. Some manuscripts include an accurate or abandoned index of recipes so that the manuscripts could be easily navigated when it was time to preserve cherries or prepare a remedy for a cold, to use two examples from this index. Some manuscripts are messy, but others are beautifully planned out with calligraphic headings. In wealthy households where these manuscripts were created and used, penmanship was an art. The people who created these manuscripts, women and men, showcased their skills in calligraphy while also recording crucial culinary and medicinal information. While compilers such as Constance Hall and Rose Kendall or Anne Kendall Carter wrote their names in their recipe books and even drew faces into the calligraphic flourishes that decorate their manuscripts, not all elaborately decorated manuscripts contain information about who owned them. Many recipe books are categorically anonymous, and this is what makes Elizabeth Howar's recipe book so distinct in this larger archive. With the exception of apothecary manuscripts, recipe books rarely distinguish what we would now call medicine from what we would now call food. This slide shows a two-page opening from University of Pennsylvania's Kislak Center MS Codex 252 started around 1600. It includes recipes to make collar beef, a cure for a cold, and another receipt for making plague water. The small slip of paper that carries the receipt to fry oysters was once affixed to the manuscript with a straight pin. Food and medicine were inextricably entangled, and the balance of the four humors in the body, blood, yellow bile, black bile, and phlegm, determined physical, mental, and emotional health. Recipe books were the household's crucial repository for this important knowledge. These manuscripts were often used for 100 years within a family or household, with each generation making comments, adding new recipes, and passing down traditions. Members of the household would either collect recipes from their social networks, friends, relatives, neighbors, in advance. So you want to have a cure ready in case someone gets a cold, or a pickle recipe because you're growing cucumbers. Or people might collect recipes for an immediate need. Someone in your family has a cold, or your cucumbers are ripe and you need to quickle them as soon as possible before they rot. Howar's recipe book is interesting in this way because it seems to have all been gathered and written out in the one book in 1687. However, in a few big chunks that she did. She has part one, part two, and she flips things in different ways. Elaine Long's recent book, Recipes and Everyday Knowledge, shows how the whole family, servants working in the household, and the larger social network participated in gathering and recording this information. Recipe book compilers copied recipes from printed and published cookbooks and sent handwritten letters requesting a recipe. And in the case of the Howar manuscript, this seems to have all happened before she prepared the large folio receipt book. Recipes in these books are written as narrative paragraphs that include ingredients, amounts, and methods. Ken Albala reminds us in Cooking in Europe, 1250 to 1650, that, I quote, "The modern recipe format is an invention of the 20th century. It is advantageous because it offers a list of ingredients with precise measurements and explicit instruction, along with cooking times and temperatures. These instructions to prepare jumbles may seem imprecise to the modern reader. Work together like biscuit rolls, bake after brown bread, but demonstrate a respect for the culinary prowess of hearth cooks employed in elite households. There are instructions to use only the best lemons, mingle ingredients, season to your taste, add a pinch of salt, or cook over a slow fire. Although household management was predominantly women's labor, from cooks and dairy maids to elite women, the contents of recipe books were fundamentally collaborative at the level of the household, with both men and women contributing recipes and using these books in consultation with family, household staff, and neighbors. Cooks in English households thus used locally grown ingredients in combination with imported goods, such as sugar and spices, to preserve the bounty of the harvest in jams, pickles, pies, and dried goods. Although local ingredients form the basis of these seasonal recipes, imported goods that came to Europe from colonial holdings or imperial trade routes flavored and acted as crucial preservation agents in these recipes, particularly sugar. While dishes prepared in elite kitchens may have been seasoned with imported spices and ingredients, expensive both in terms of their actual price and in the human cost of their production by enslaved or exploited laborers in the West and East Indies, most of what English people ate across the socioeconomic spectrum was grown locally and consumed quickly or preserved for future use in the 17th century. Okay, part 2, Elizabeth Howar's ice cream recipe. Howar's recipe book shows this balance of aspirational recipes that include an abundance of imported ingredients and recipes that feature local foodstuffs such as dairy and produce. One example of this that we can talk about more if there's time is a recipe for a London posset, which calls for locally produced cream and eggs, but imported sack and nutmeg to flavor it. Her recipe for the ice cream is exceedingly rare for 1687 London. In Ice Cream: A Global History, Laura B. Weiss dates the first written ice cream recipes to Nicholas Lemery's 1674 Receipts for Flavored Ices in French, and Antonio Latini's 1698 cookbook, which was written in Italian and published in Naples. Even though food historian Ivan Day notes that 1 plate of ice cream was listed on a bill of fare for Charles II's banquet course at the 1671 Garter Feast and discussed by Elias Ashmole in his account of the evening, there are no known ice cream recipes in 17th century printed cookbooks. The first English printed ice cream recipe was published in Mrs. Mary Eel's Receipts in London in 1718. So here is Howar's recipe. The ice cream. Take a quart of good cream. Sweeten it with sugar, rose water, or what you please. You must have little tin things which are made on purpose for ice cream. First, put your cream into the tin things. Do the cover close on them and do it up close with butter about the edge of the cover. Then take 4 pounds of ice. Lay clean cloth on the ground, and with a hammer, break the ice in pieces. Then have some roach alum and bay salt. Strew this on the ice. Beat the alum small. Then have an earthen pot. Put some of the ice in the bottom of the pot. Then put in the tin things with the cream and lay all the ice about them that they may stand fast in the pot, and cover them all with ice. Then lay the cloth over the pot which the ice was broken on. So set it in a cold cellar, let it stand 1 hour, then take it out of the tin pans, put it on silver plates, so serve it up. The recipe describes a detailed method for sealing the flavored cream in tin things that were especially made for ice cream, breaking the ice and using salt to alter its temperature, and chilling the cream in an earthen pot in the cellar. Although I haven't seen these specialized tins listed in inventories, such as those surveyed by Sarah Pennell and other experts in material cookery culture, Pennell and others do note that London households and victualers maintain specialized equipment for their use or their trade. And a century later, Diderot's famous encyclopedia includes designs for decorative ice cream molds that the cream would have been frozen in. Since the recipe does not require churning, which radically changes the crystallization pattern of the frozen cream, the texture would have been rather different than modern ice cream. Howard also calls for bay salt and roach alum or aluminum salts to create an endothermic effect that will freeze the cream. Both of these items were available from the apothecary or even the grocer, maybe with the salts. Weiss notes that Italian scientists, and I'm quoting Weiss here, had learned that submerging a container of water in a bucket of snow mixed together with potassium nitrate or saltpeter would freeze water solid. The saltpeter, later salt was used, lowered the freezing point of the ice, transferring heat from the ice cream mixture. Della Porta described this method of freezing in his 1559 text, Natural Magic, which was translated and which soon spread throughout Europe. My updated version of Hawar's recipe, pictured here, has a rather different crystal structure because I used a modern ice cream maker when I prepared it at the Clark Library rather than an earthen pot and specialized tins. Southern California, the cellaring conditions wouldn't have been right, and there was an ice cream maker at the library, but not the specialized tins. It's also unclear exactly where Howard would have acquired the ice to prepare this recipe. There are records of 16th and 17th century ice houses, pits covered in straw near London. And we know that King James I commissioned 2 brick-lined snow pits to be dug in the ground at Greenwich. Rosewater could have been purchased from the apothecary or distilled at home using the right equipment. I did not note a rosewater or other flower water recipe in Howard's receipt book, so she might not have had the equipment for home distilling at her hands. The cream and butter would have come from a local dairy, perhaps even from cows grazing on spittle fields. If Howard or her household made this recipe for the first time in the 1680s when she compiled her recipe book, Spitalfields is a less likely source than if she had made the recipe earlier and then it was written down. In his tour of Great Britain, Daniel Defoe notes that during his lifetime, he saw the open fields overtaken by illegal buildings as the London suburbs expanded, and Huguenot weavers set up a thriving hub of fabric industry in the district. By the 1680s, the fields of Spitalfields were substantially reduced or totally overtaken by housing, according to Roy Porter's research. The sugar in Howard's ice cream recipe connects a frozen European dessert with growing imperial networks. During the 17th century, ingredients such as sugar, which previously were imported from Asia, were planted in the Caribbean and by the English first in Barbados, about which we've just heard so much. And sugar there was cultivated by enslaved Africans, which led to cheaper prices and more widespread availability in England in the latter half of the 17th century. In her recent book, Tasting Difference, Food, Race, and Cultural Encounters in Early Modern Literature, Gitanjali Shahani writes that the impossibility, this is her words, the impossibility of sweetness and the violence entailed in its quest is foremost in narratives of the plantation, like those of Richard Ligon writing about Barbados, and Thomas Tyron, who advocated for abstaining from sugar altogether because of the violence incurred in its production. She argues that consuming sugar, Shahani writes that consuming sugar is an act of eating the other and encountering difference with the mouth. For Shahani, this kind of intercultural consumption can be equal parts oppression and delight, abjection and curiosity. Following Shahani's work, I wonder what kind of spatial transportation and intercultural encounter the ice cream offered to eaters who consumed it. Was it an encounter with the plantations of Barbados, or was it that encounter displaced by the almost impossible cold temperature of the dish? Was it a taste of sweetness or coldness or both? So part 3, 17th century ice cream recipes. Although ice cream recipes were scarce, we can put Elizabeth Howard's recipe in dialogue with 2 others in recipe books attributed to Anne Fanshawe and Grace Carteret, 1st Countess of Granville. These 2 elite women were known family friends, and their recipe books have significant overlaps, though their ice cream recipes differ. In addition, Lady Fanshawe's husband, Richard, was a diplomat, and the family lived in Paris, Ireland, Portugal, and Spain from 1648 to 1651. Fanshawe's recipe book was influenced by broader European food trends and imported colonial ingredients such as chocolate. She has a very famous hot chocolate recipe. Here is her ice cream recipe. To make icy cream, take 3 pints of the best cream, boil it with a blade of mace or else perfume it with orange flower water or ambergris. Sweeten the cream with sugar, let it stand till it is quite cold, then put it into boxes, either of silver or tin. Then take ice chopped into small pieces and put it into a tub and set the boxes in the ice, covering them all over. And let them stand in the ice 2 hours, and the cream will come to be ice in the boxes. Then turn them out onto a salver with some of the same seasoned cream, so serve it up to the table. In this recipe, a cook can choose their ice cream flavor: mace, the dried husk of a nutmeg; ambergris, cured whale excretions; or orange flower water. Ivan Day asserts that Fanshaw's recipe will not work without adjusting the method because it includes no salt or saltpeter to help the ice stay frozen longer and produce a more effective cooling impact. When Day recreated Fanshaw's icy cream, he used the recipe from Granville's recipe instead. And here is her recipe. And the subtle differences between these are so interesting to me. The ice cream. Take a fine pan like a pudding pan, a quarter of a yard deep, and the breadth of a trencher. Take your cream and sweeten it with sugar and 3 spoonfuls of orange flower water, and fill your pan 3/4 full. Then cover it with a tin cover and lay it close up with butter. Have ready a coarse cloth laid on the ground and break your ice in pretty lumps. Have ready 3 pence of saltpeter, 2 pence of roach alum, 3 pence of bay salt. Beat the alum and saltpeter very well and mingle it with your ice and bay salt. Lay some this into a sleen pot. Then set your cream on the ice on the pot and strew the rest all over it. Then clap the cloth all over the pot, which will be immediately froze. Then let it stand just 2 hours and no longer. Order your time to your dinner exactly. Take your warm hands and work about the pan to loosen the cream, that it may turn out on a salver. First take off all the butter. Send quick to the table, or it will melt again. Granville's recipe calls.
Sorry, we're running 20 minutes. If you could wrap up.
Yep, I've got my last paragraph. Okay, thanks. Granville's recipe calls for the fewest ingredients: cream, sugar, orange blossom water, and it also has the most detailed directions for preparation and speedy serving. Like Hauer's recipe, it calls for using butter to seal the tins, as well as salt to help freeze the cream. It is clear when and how the freezing action will take place, and the recipe user knows exactly when it must be prepared for peak appearance and taste. It is a fleeting and luxurious dish. To conclude, for Fanshawe and Granville, ice cream might have magicked up a whole array of associations: foreign travel, banquets, elite gatherings. Are these the same associations that were available to Elizabeth Hauer in Shoreditch and Spitalfields? I'm left with an array of questions that I'd be happy to discuss further during the Q&A. Would any of these women have located their ice cream in the places where the sugar that made it so sweet was grown and processed by enslaved laborers? Would they have been transported by the iciness to colder climes? Would they have had the means and wherewithal to acquire the ice, saltpeter, and special tins required to make this dish? Finally, when in the year would they serve this dish? In the colder months or on a hot summer's day when it would be all the more refreshing? Thank you.